Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up, to stand up and fight back. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Speak Up. We're starting off a new year, 2014, and I want to introduce my first guest, but a little bit introduction. For a long time now, we've been talking about issues with the family courts, with parental alienation, and on and on. We see case after case. We thought it was an isolated case here in New Hampshire where it was just part of our system that we needed to tweak. However, the syndrome seems to be, and that meaning the problems with the courts, is nationwide. Whether you're in Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, California, it's a nationwide problem. And that's why we're bringing in Joe Sorge, our today's guest, who actually developed a movie, created a movie. He's the founder of a movie called Divorce Corp. Joe, I want to, can I call you Joe?
Absolutely.
All right, welcome to the show of Speak Up.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Well, we've been talking about this particular issue for some time, and one of the things that people think is that they're all alone, that their case is an isolated case, they've committed no crime, they've done nothing wrong, and yet somehow they've been separated by some reason of the courts. This is kind of a nationwide problem.
Yeah, we agree. Absolutely. We see it in just about every state. People have written in and spoken about very similar issues everywhere.
Now, you've documented a number of these cases that nationwide, correct?
Yeah, we, for the creation of the movie Divorce Corp, we interviewed over 100 people, including judges, lawyers, custody evaluators, forensic accountants, law professors, professors of psychology, and most importantly, the victims of the system, to get their stories and try to put together a 90-minute film that would convey to the audience what, the big picture of what's going on.
So people generally, do you find that when you talk to the victims, do you think that they generally feel as though they're isolated, they're alone, that this is just their problem, maybe they know one other person?
Absolutely, absolutely. Everybody feels that somehow they are to blame. And I think the court system makes them feel that way. They call them high conflict litigants.
Right.
They say that they're basically, the court system is acting as if these people are causing the problem and that they've never seen, never seen the problem before, except in this one case. Whereas in fact, the problems occur all the time, and I know that because I've sat through family court and watched as part of the research for the film, and everybody gets abused. And it makes the post office look like a 5-star hotel.
Now, how did this happen? When did this all start? Where is the beginning of this? And if you got a second to talk about that.
I believe it's Lord Acton is quoted to say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's where it started. In old England, they had two types of courts: courts of law and courts of equity. And courts of equity were supposed to handle matters that were non-financial, that weren't really delineated in the black letter law. And it originated as an appeal to the king to handle situations that were not part of, black letter law. And so the courts of equity began to, some of the states, some of the early colonies, the U.S. colonies, established courts of equity. But when we created our Constitution, the word equity only appears once in the Constitution, and it says that the judiciary has the right to create the Supreme Court to handle matters in law and in equity. And so in other words, they were saying, don't create these separate courts of equity, just set up a general court system where you can handle either type of matter. And a matter of law would be, okay, you exceeded the speeding limit and there's a $200 fine for that and you pay the fine. An issue of equity might be, you have a nonprofit organization that owns a tract of land and someone starts building on the land, and you go to the judge and you say, hey, can you stop them from building? And the judge would issue a restraining order so that they would not build on the land. Well, it turned out that because women didn't have the right to appear in court up until the early part of the 20th century, that they would go to these courts of equity, or they'd have a man appear for them in a court of equity and talk about if they wanted a divorce. And so it became just customary to use the courts of equity for divorce. And what that means, unfortunately, is in a court of equity, you have no right to the constitutional protections that are afforded to you either in normal civil court or in the criminal courts. You have no right to jury. You have no right to a lawyer if you cannot afford one. You have no right to cross-examine witnesses that testify against you. You have no right to a speedy trial. You have no right to a transcript. These are almost fiefdoms, not courtrooms. And the judge is all-powerful. The judge can do almost anything they want. They can throw you in jail. They can fine you any amount. They can tell you you can speak or can't speak. They can tell you can testify in your case or not testify in your case. And so the judge has absolute power. There's almost no oversight of these family court judges, and it's almost impossible to appeal because the types of matters that a family court judge rules on are issues considered to be issues of equity, and the appellate courts don't oversee issues of equity. And so you have, like I started out with, you have absolute power, and I think absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so people experience that viewpoint of the judge as being essentially God up there on the throne.
How did they gain such power? And is it because the legislature gave them that authority, or do they actually have that authority?
I think that's a fascinating question. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a law professor, but all the reading that I've done, it seems to me they just took it. When the Constitution was created, there was separation of the three branches of government, and the judiciary was supposed to hear cases where there was a dispute between people and apply the law to that dispute. And then I think it was, I can't remember, Madison versus so-and-so in the late 1700s, early 1800s, it came, well, what if we don't understand the law? Who interprets the law? And the case ended up saying that the Supreme Court gets the right to interpret the law and read it however they see fit. And so then, as I said, some of the colonies had courts of equity, but when they established the court system for the federal level, they didn't have courts of equity, but they were able to still hear these issues that they considered equitable issues. And unfortunately, by branding the divorce and custody issues as equitable issues, it allows them to evade the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, because they say that these are not criminal cases, these are not cases at law, these are cases at equity, and so they can make up their own rules.
Yet they can take away your property, they can take away your children, they can put you in jail, rules of evidence can be thrown out. Rule 1.2, all rules are, here in New Hampshire, that's a court rule. Rule 1.2.
Absolutely correct. All of those things they can do. And people say, well, what about my constitutional rights? And the judges laugh. It's like, well, we took away your constitutional rights by putting a name tag over this courtroom called Court of Equity instead of Court of Law.
Interesting.
And who gave them the right to do that? They did it themselves.
In the history of New Hampshire, I was talking to a few experts here, former state reps, Representative Mirsky and Itza, and they were talking about some of the history, how that the general court actually created the courts here, and they've had to wipe them out a couple of times because of corruption. They had to start all over again. But somehow, over the years, the courts have insulated themselves from the general court, and now all of a sudden they're right unto themselves. And that being said, if a judge makes a bad rule and you're out of money, you're out of luck. You're out of luck. And if they don't like you, you're out of luck. That's not justice.
I agree 100% with that. And, Thomas Jefferson had a quote in the late 1700s, and he basically said that, judges are susceptible to prejudice, to friendships, to bribery, to allegiance with a particular political party, and that, you are afforded far greater justice with a jury than you are with a judge. And I have to say, though, we do not advocate bringing juries into family court. We have a different solution. But I would say that a jury gives you far more justice than a judge. I don't know how long we have here, but
as long as
a judge hears the evidence and also hears a lot of other hearsay and information that would not otherwise be admitted into evidence for a jury to hear it. And so somehow that judge has to partition his brain or her brain to segregate valid evidence from hearsay and other things that shouldn't influence that individual. Well, I come from a scientific background, and I'll tell you, no one has come up with the little chamber in the brain where we're able to store information that doesn't cause us to become prejudiced. And yet the judiciary thinks that judges have this ability to do it. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a neurological mechanism that allows them to do that. And so they often become biased by things that they hear that have nothing to do with the facts of the case. But unfortunately, there's no recourse right now, and that's why we need to reform the system immediately.
And I totally agree. One of the highlights that there were two cases in New Hampshire. There was the Johnson case and the Vandenberg case, where the judge was handed an envelope with supposedly evidence to, take the child away, but the parent was never allowed to see what was in that envelope. It was a sealed envelope. Mm-hmm. So they took the child away, and the accused was never charged with a crime, but their child was taken away. And to this day, they still have not seen what is in that envelope, which is frightening. It could just be, hello, judge, take away the child, period. No evidence, nothing. That's frightening. That is going to that absolute power. And you want the state to know, but the bar came out against, we tried to do some reforms recently, and the bar came out against it. The newspapers came out against a minor change in our Constitution, which we tried to do. And I wonder if that's also part of the problem.
Well, excuse me. I think there's a difficult tension between parental rights and the best interests of the child, which is how the family courts currently justify everything that they do. Not everything that they do, but most of what they do when it comes to custody. And, I understand it. If a parent wanted to bind the feet of a child so that they had little delicate feet when they grew up, like the Chinese used to do, most Americans would say, no, the state should intervene and prohibit those parents from doing that. We would consider that to be abuse of the child. And I think in instances of abuse or neglect, and I think we have to define those very carefully so that they're not abused to extend to all kinds of behavior like, oh, he's feeding my child Special K in the morning and therefore he's abusing the child. It should be, something that would be considered a criminal act that would be classified as abuse. But short of abuse or neglect, I think a parent should have a right to parent their children. And the Supreme Court has opined on many occasions that the right to parent one's children is a fundamental right that shouldn't be taken away from parents lightly without the state having a necessary reason for intervening. So, there's a spectrum there, but unfortunately, as far as I may be on one end of that spectrum to say that, the courts really should not take away parental rights except for abuse or neglect, right? The courts instead believe that best interest of the child means they could determine what color socks your child wears, right? Or where they go to school or who they have as friends. And I think it's far too far in the other direction. And that leads to not only sometimes unjust decisions, but it also leads to this whole concept of using the children as carrots and sticks to try to manipulate the parents into going through expensive custody evaluations or going to anger management classes or parenting classes that are all run by the friends of the court.
Well, that's what I wanted to get at, and that's basically the topic of the movie is Divorce Corp. This is an industry.
It's an industry. It's a $50 billion a year industry, and certain people within it will admit that. Other people say no, it's a public service, and even though litigants have to pay for that service, that it's done in the best interests of the families and the children. And I think that's true in some cases. I think there are certainly good lawyers out there. There are good judges out there. But unfortunately, because there are no checks and balances, and because that single human being has all the power with no oversight, you run into abuse of that power and abuse of that power all too often.
How did you get involved with this, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I had been through a divorce, and mine turned out fine. It was expensive, but it wasn't nearly as disastrous as it is for many of the people that we've come across. But I sat in the courtroom for many hours waiting for my case to come up, and I had the opportunity to listen to many other cases while I was there. And I saw how the judges treated the litigants. I saw how the lawyers interacted with the judge. And I saw what appeared to me as too cozy of a relationship between the judges and the lawyers for the judge to really be impartial. And so I followed up on that. We conducted some research, and lo and behold, we turned up many, many people across the country that had been through nightmarish experiences with the family court. And so we decided to make a documentary about it.
We have a term here in New Hampshire that some have bandied about, the despised litigants, those that actually go to the courts without an attorney. They're considered despised litigants, and it seems like they can make a real valid case because they're not cozy with the judge or with whoever. It seems as though they are despised and they don't fare too well. Are you familiar with that?
I didn't hear your last thing.
Are you familiar with the people that represent themselves? Either they've either gone through a lawyer.
They're at a great disadvantage unless the other party also is representing themselves. And then when the judge, if two very poor people go into the court and they say they want to get divorced, the judge handles that very quickly. And my sinister side says that's because there's no money in it, so get them out and move on to the next case. But if one party has an attorney and the other is self-represented, I believe that the party with the attorney has a significant advantage if that attorney has a relationship, a favorable relationship with the judge.
Does the movie talk a little bit about Title IV money or Title D4 money at all? That we've heard that term bandied about.
We do not get into Title IV money. We only had 90 minutes, and there were many, many serious issues. So we didn't get to that, but we might just say on your program that these are matching funds that the states receive from the federal government for collecting child support and in some states alimony. And I think what it does is it creates an incentive for the states and the employees of the state to increase child support amounts where they can or where they think they can, and then to be very aggressive about collecting it.
So there is an incentive against one side or the other for the coffers, if you will. Interesting.
There's a financial incentive for the state, and I think the perverse outcome for that is that because child support is justified when there is a disparity in the custody time between the two parents, that the courts, by causing one parent to have a majority of time and the other to have a minority of time, they drive the financial formula toward higher amounts of child support. And so what the child support formulas essentially do is they favor unequal parenting. because they give these states an incentive to create unequal parenting relationships. And we did a macro study of the amount of alimony and child support that has been awarded recently versus 20 years ago. And even though the marriage rate and the divorce rate are declining per 1,000 individuals, even though men and women are getting closer and closer to earning the same amount of wages, not the same, and we believe in equal rights, we believe in equal opportunity, and so we think it's a good thing that men and women are starting to earn closer amounts of wages, and we want it to be equal. It's closer than it's ever been. Women represent 50% of the US workforce now. So even though there are all of those macro trends that would suggest that the amount of dependent support should be going down, in fact, the amount of dependent support has been increasing faster than inflation in the last 20 years. And it's up to the point of $44 billion a year now. Again, I think what this reflects is that the states have an incentive to create these support awards, even under sociological conditions where those awards should be going down.
And they've been improved.
And then that's, I think, creating a lot of the tension in family court.
And you know, people look at the parents. You know, the parents are going back and forth, and they're struggling. They had a great tear up. It's traumatic. But the bottom line is the children are being affected by this as well, and they're being just as torn.
Well, that's the great tragedy of it all, or the terrible tragedy of it all, is that the commodity in this equation are the children.
Right.
As one of the attorneys said in our film, they look at the children as little bags of money, because the more custody time you get, the more child support you get, or the less child support you have to pay. And so the children get caught in the middle of a financial tug of war between the parents over who's going to get more time with the kids.
And that's not a win-win at all at any point. A little bit about the movie. Where will it be showing?
Well, it's going to be showing in 35 cities around the country starting this Friday, January 10th. You could go to our website, and it has all of the theaters listed. The website is Divorce Corp, C-O-R-P, divorcecorp.com. And just click on the film page, and you'll see all of the locations. We weren't able to release the film widely. The theaters generally are not enthusiastic about documentaries because people generally don't go to see documentaries. But we were lucky enough to convince a couple of the large theater chains to give us a shot. We told them that there are 40 million divorced persons in the United States, people who have been through divorce in the United States. There are 4 million people going through divorce at any one time. There are more people going through custody disputes over, percentage of time, or looking for adjustments in their child support amounts. And so this is really a film that, probably touches 50 to 100 million Americans. And when they heard that, when they saw the screener and they saw, it was made at a professional level, they gave us a shot. So we're in 35 theaters, and they said if we do well this coming weekend, they will expand into many more theaters and many more locations. So we have our fingers crossed. Well,
we look to have you, hopefully we're going to have you here in New Hampshire. We're working with some locals, and we'll see what we can do. I'm wondering, do you allow legislators to look at it? I mean, are there ways that they can actually see it if we were to bring it to the New Hampshire Capitol?
You mean short of having them pay $10 to go to the theater? Yeah, of course. If you were able to arrange a private screening for some legislators, we'd make it available to you.
I think it's important because a lot of times, I think as a rep, a lot of us, we have like 800 bills sometimes a year, and when somebody brings up divorce, they go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But if they get an understanding of what's going on, they're the ones who can make the changes.
Yes. And actually, Kevin, what we'd like to do, and I have to say, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, I'm pretty apolitical myself. I was a scientist for many years, and now I'm trying to become a filmmaker, and I really enjoy it. And what I want to do is make more films. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. My children are all adults. I did this to make a film, and to shed light on what I thought was a dysfunctional system.
Right.
But I would like to see some reform. I've heard enough horror stories from people that, it's really caught me. And I want to make sure that, this film doesn't just fizzle out and end up not making some type of change. And so I'm going to go ahead and sponsor a conference sometime in the spring. We haven't set up dates yet, and invite people who are interested in reform legislation to that conference. A couple of days, we'll have people get up there and speak about suggested changes, horror stories, other areas of the world where there's better systems, and I think, and I'd like to invite some legislators to that, so that we can catalyze a movement here to get some improvement in the family laws.
All right. I know that Ron and Sherry Palmer, I think you're familiar with them. They wrote a book, Not in the Child's Best Interest. They also have another book coming out, and hopefully that'll sell as well, to give some people an understanding of the history, what they can actually physically do, but also that legislators should actually look at that, read it, go through it, get educated, as far as maybe some ideas how they can make some positive changes. I'm not an attorney either. I was a lawmaker. Hopefully at some point we'll be a lawmaker again. But I see a problem, and the kids are the ones who are really getting hurt by this. And I don't like seeing them being pawns in a system that is self-serving at some times. So,
yeah, we agree with that 100%. And I respect the Palmers very much, and I've read their book. And they're actually giving some leading some question and answer periods in Dallas next week after some of our screenings. But I think that the current Constitution perhaps does not go far enough to settle some of these issues. And I have not seen their new book on the 28th Amendment yet. They're going to send it to me next week. Hopefully they will have some language in there that can resolve some of these issues. And I think some of the things, I have a book coming out in 2 weeks called Divorce Corp as well. And, we traveled around the world and saw how they handled family law matters in other countries. And some of them, I think, are far better than the system we have now. And so we also put in some suggested tenets for reform at the end of the book. And so I think, there's thinking going on now on how to potentially improve the system where a lot of this destruction and acrimony is no longer incentivized.
Right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on Speak Up. This is a great opportunity. I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. I think once you get public sentiment or the public understanding that this is a problem, that's when the changes can be made. But until everybody's aware that this really is hurting a lot of people, nothing's going to happen. And if you go on Facebook, you can see this group, you can see fathers groups, mothers groups, children's groups, children's rights. There's a ton of them out there, but it seems like you need something that can bind them together. And I'm hoping that this can help do that in a way that real reform can happen. But people have to be educated.
I think we can. I think if you look at the last chapter in our book, I think the legislative changes that we suggest at least will form the basis for a healthy discussion, and I think go at least halfway towards solving many of the problems. And I'm hoping that our film can catalyze that national movement. And
that the book is the same. It's Divorce Corp, the book, and that comes out. You'll be able to get that on Amazon or.
Eventually, yeah. It's being printed now, so it should be out by the end of the month. Come to our website, divorcecorp.com. You can either pre-buy the book or we'll have the book up there, and then we'll work on broader distribution once we have the copies in the warehouse.
Wonderful. And if I can get the legislator to look at the film, you'll help me out with that?
I'll help you out.
All right, wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on the show. This is really huge, so thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for having me.
All right. And thank you for watching Speak Up. Again, this is our first Speak Up for 2014, so happy 2014. Let's make it a good one. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak Up. We also want to thank our sponsor, Center for Redress of Grievances, LLC. You can reach them at www.centerforredress.com. If you want more information about Speak Up or want to be a guest, you have something to say, contact us at speakupnh@gmail.com. And thanks for watching. Until next week. Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandals and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up. To stand up and fight back.